All usage of any kind of media, whether that be images and/or audio, are reserved for their respective copyright holders, and I, by using them, make no claim of ownership and am simply using them to give this video a visual flair for the audience. Hello, my name is Specs2. As I'm sure a lot of fans can agree, Yu-Gi-Oh! Arc 5 was a mess. From too big of a cast and too many plot threads, it all ended up in a big tangle, to the point that the conclusions were hardly satisfying. As much as I agree with most of the criticisms, one that I have that I believe less people would agree with is the mishandling of Yuto, the Xyz counterpart of Arc 5's main protagonist Yuya Sakaki. Yuto was my favourite U-boy, despite his brief time on screen, and I believe that had he remained actually on screen for not necessarily the whole show, but at least the majority of the show, his inclusion would have a great impact on not just other characters and plotlines, but even his own development, rather than just being a spiritual partner to Yuya, like Astral from Yuma and Sexal. Of course, keeping Yuto on screen would have some major story implications, but I'm confident this rewrite will be able to solve them. As this rewrite goes along, I will be making changes to other characters and moments that I feel require them, as Arc 5 was a mess beyond one singular character. Before I move on to the changes, I would like to comment on Yuto's handling before his death. Before then, Yuto was portrayed brilliantly. He was mysterious and suspicious, but in the end he was broken. The war in the Xyz dimension had really taken its toll on him. In the flashbacks that we do see, he's shown to be much happier and relaxed, even just by his choice of clothes, whereas his post-war attire is very charred and damaged. His relationship with Yuzu also really showed some good development. Yuto went from despising fusion summoning completely to then meeting Yuzu, only to realize that maybe not everyone associated with fusion summoning is the enemy. It's also nice that he notices how similar she is to Ruri, not just based on their appearance. His brief time with Yuya was nice as well, following the battle royale with Sora, as it not only gave more exposition on the world of Arc 5, but is enough for Yuya to understand and empathize with Yuto. Yuto's personality also really shined in his duels prior to his match with Yugo. Against Shingo, Yuto showed that he can comfortably defend himself with graveyard effects and disrupt his opponent's plays. In his short duel against Sora, Yuto showed his ability to manipulate his opponent's moves to set up his own counterattack. However, we also see that Yuto is tired of fighting. Against Shingo, it's only until Shingo attempts to defeat Yuto during his turn that Yuto makes the play to win the duel. Also during the duel against Sora, both Yuya and Sora noticed that Yuto chose not to use Dark Rebellion's effect for a second time, even though doing so would have won him the duel that turn. Sora notes this as Yuto being cocky, whereas Yuya deduces that Yuto's heart is no longer in the war. This realization is the perfect setup for Yuto's moral flux, as we are then catapulted into Yuto's climactic duel against Yugo. Now I must admit I find this duel very conflicting. Not only does it kill off my favourite character, but because his death is the cause of a pure misunderstanding between Yuto and Yugo, mainly from Yugo's side. As we come to learn later, Yuri abducted both Rin and Ruri, the love interests of both Yugo and Yuto respectively. In both cases, Yuri was wearing a cloak with only his face visible, meaning that since all the U-boys look similar, Yugo suspected Yuto when they first met in the Xyz dimension. While because of that suspicion, and as part of a running joke, Yugo's name, Yuto believed Yugo to be an ally of the fusion dimension. In that confrontation, Yugo escaped after some of the resistance members met up with Yuto during the duel, and only now have they met up again. From what we see of Yugo later, he allows his emotions to determine his choices, meaning he is quicker to accuse Yuto. Comparatively, I'm sure Yuto will be more willing to talk the situation out, but due to Yugo's personality, he is forced to defend himself, which unfortunately isn't enough. The duel is still pretty good. We get to see good Synchro vs Xyz action, and eventually, both Yugo and Yuto get their dragons to the field, Clearwing Synchro Dragon and Dark Rebellion Xyz Dragon. Now, due to the intensity of the duel, both duelists start to awaken, and their inner Zoc attempts to take over, to which point Yuya intervenes to attempt to calm them both down. I used to get annoyed at this because Yuto had finally gained the advantage at that point, despite mostly being on the back foot. However, looking back, Yuya was only trying to do what he felt was right, stop the duel and talk the situation out. Yuya manages to calm Yuto down, but Yugo ignores Yuya and continues the duel, defeating Yuto. And despite knowing he is about to lose, Yuto doesn't even hesitate to save Yuya from the shockwave, another example of why he's my favourite character. As we witness, immediately after the duel's conclusion, Yuto merges with Yuya, causing him to fall unconscious until a few days later. This is where I'm implementing the big change for this rewrite. I would like to not only change this merge, but how merging for the U-boys worked overall. Instead of immediately physically merging, Yuya and Yuto only mentally merge. In other words, their minds and souls become one, but they still have their own physical forms. Not only would this allow Yuto to remain on screen, but given some later changes, it hopefully shouldn't cause any plot holes later. In this merge, they both can hear and feel each other's thoughts and emotions, and while they won't understand how and why completely, will be able to telepathically communicate. In addition, if either of them are about to awaken, they both do. However, the one who is dueling will be able to use the other's cards, as it will materialize in their deck, will return to where it was when Yuya and Yuto return to normal. Yuya and Yuto will still have a small heart-to-heart before the merge occurs, and when Yuzu arrives, her bracelet will teleport Yugo away, but Yuya and Yuto cannot be teleported away from each other now that they have merged. And this is another important aspect, the bracelet teleportation. As we see before this episode, Yuzu's bracelet is capable of teleporting Yuto away from Yuya if they're about to be in close proximity. This is of course part of Rei's countermeasure to keep the fragments of Zark from interacting with each other. However, I am making it so that one singular bracelet is only capable of teleporting 25% of Zark, as each bracelet and their corresponding owners all constitute 25% of Rei. Yuzu's bracelet is now incapable of teleporting Yuto and Yuya away from each other now that they have merged, because as far as the bracelet is concerned, they both constitute the same 50% of Zark, which is too strong for Yuzu's bracelet alone. However, as we'd eventually learn, for whatever reason, Yuzu's bracelet is seemingly the only one capable of this teleportation mechanic, as Serena's bracelet only ever activates at the presence of Zark, but not to teleport the U-boys away from each other like Yuzu's. I will be changing this as well, making it so that all the bracelets have this teleportation mechanic, even though it won't be used that much going forward. Yuzu will find Yuya and Yuto unconscious beside each other, each holding their ace dragons in their hands, touching each other. Yuzu will contact Gon Genzaka for assistance, but Yuto will still lose his dual disc, which will still get recovered by Reiji. The next episode will remain quite similar. Yuya would still be unconscious in his bed, and Yuto could be in a futon next to Yuya's bed. I think it would be amusing for Yuto to be wearing a spare of Yu's pajamas, just for him to be having a different attire. Yuzu and Yoko would be sitting next to them, with Yuzu attempting to somewhat explain who Yuto is or why he looks like Yuya. Before Yuzu can go into more detail, we would still get the same shenanigans with Mieru, except this time she'll also be confused by Yuto. Before she can probe further, Yuzu persuades Yoko to escort Mieru to the championship, and that she and Yuya will join them later. This leaves only Yuya, Yuto, and Yuzu in Yuya's bedroom. A short while later, Yuya wakes up and is embraced by Yuzu. Yuya reassures Yuzu he is okay and gets up, notices Yuto on the floor still unconscious, and goes to look at his deck on his desk. It's important to note that both Yuya and Yuto's decks are on Yuya's desk, with their ace dragons face up on the respective deck. During Yuya and Yuto's heart-to-heart, neither U-boy was dying, therefore there was no need for the entrustment of the ace dragon. After that, Yuya recounts to Yuzu the events of the previous night, from Sora's disappearance, to Yuto's exposition dump, to Yugo's arrival and Yuto's defeat. Yuzu also confesses to having met Yuto as well, from the duel with Shingo, the physical interaction with Sora, the confusion involving Sora, Shun and Masaru, and the alley conversation during Shun versus the LDS trio. After a brief while, Yuto wakes up as well. Both Yuya and Yuzu embrace Yuto, who thanks them for bringing him to Yuya's home. This small tie with just them would better build in their friendship, and show some growth in Yuto by expanding on who he feels comfortable being vulnerable in front of. One thing about Yuya I would change is have him have a board in his room that is primarily for him gathering clues on his father, Yusho's disappearance. Yuya always struck me as the kind of person who'd want to find his father, and in the pursuit of so, have a board in his room to keep track. Between our current trio, I feel Yuya, Yuzu and Yuto would come up with a theory that since all four of the dimensions, Fusion, Synchro, Exceeds and Standard, are parallel to each other, each dimension houses the same individuals, who, despite looking similar, are completely different, much like in the CW Arrowverse, where everyone has a doppelganger in each dimension. As we'll come to learn later, this is not the case, but the characters have no other real explanation, and this would allow them to move on from this mystery, and it's not the most absurd explanation for Yuya, Yuto and Yugo looking alike, and Yuzu and Ruri looking alike. Using a section of Yuya's board, Yuya would split the section into 4 quadrants, and label them with the dimension names. In the corresponding quadrants, a label for Yuya, Yuto, Yugo, Yuzu and Ruri will be put up, and 3 question marks, 1 in Synchro and 2 in Fusion. Yuto would explain the situation with Yugo, and Yuzu would be the one to suggest that Yugo was searching for her Synchro doppelganger, much like how Yuto and Shun have been searching for Ruri. Yuya suggests that perhaps the Fusion doppelganger was the person responsible. All 3 agree that it is a possibility that if Yugo only saw Yuri by face, which he did, it makes sense why he immediately accused Yuto on sight. It should also be noted that Yuzu suggests that perhaps Yuri also kidnapped Ruri, and now she might be the next one, as it can't be a coincidence that her doppelgangers have been abducted. This would give Yuzu more incentive to duel against Yuri when they eventually meet during the Miami Championship Battle Royale. After a while, Yuya and Yuzu agree that they need to head out to the stadium before the end of the first round. They invite Yuto to join them, but he declines, as he still feels tired from the previous night. Therefore he goes back to sleep, surprisingly with a smile. This exhaustion is actually an aspect of the merge that Yuto is unfortunately suffering from. Given he, out of Yuya and Yuto, was the one defeated, his soul is currently fading in and out of existence, like Astral in Zexal, who would fade in and out as Yuma loses life points in duels. With the current merge, Yuto's soul is currently tethering onto Yuya's to keep his body, but as a side effect, Yuto is more susceptible to fatigue and exhaustion, as shown here. The next time we see Yuto will be during the duel between Yuya and Kachidoki. As we see in that duel, Yuya, in a very dire situation, not only awakens for the first time, but also Exceeds Summon Dark Rebellion Exceeds Dragon for the first time, and uses it to win the duel. Of course, in this case, this will be slightly different, with the obvious difference being, Yuya doesn't actually have Dark Rebellion in his deck, as it is still with Yuto back at his house. As much as this might seem as a plot hole for Yuya, without Dark Rebellion he would lose the duel, this is where the telepathic merge becomes implemented. The way it would work is since Yuto and Yuya share the same mind, they both occasionally share their thoughts and emotions. For the moment, they are both unaware of this, but as they start to spend more time with each other, this ability will increasingly manifest, to the point they will use it more voluntarily. Getting back to the duel, this would start as soon as Kachidoki fusion summons his ace monster, Edaton the Conqueror Star. Yuya would start to feel Yuto's hatred for fusion summoning, but it would only be faint, only a slight itch at the back of his mind. It's only until Yuya takes a big hit to his life points and begins to worry about losing, does Yuto's hatred and anger become so intense that Yuya awakens for the first time. For Yuto, he can sense the intense emotion in Yuya's mind, but he feels he is dreaming and so doesn't feel too strange about it until later. Regardless, now that Yuya has awakened, his now strong connection with Yuto allows for Dark Rebellion to momentarily manifest in Yuya's deck, meaning he is able to use it to win the duel. As soon as Yuya snaps back to normality and Yuto wakes up paranoid, they both check their decks to notice that Dark Rebellion is in Yuto's deck and not in Yuya's. Seeing this, Yugo shrugs off as what he felt and saw as nothing more than a dream and returns to sleep, whereas Yuya is not only shaken by what he did, but also confused as well. This still makes Shun, who is watching, suspicious towards Yuya, as the last he ever saw of Yuto was with Yuya in the security cam footage just before Yugo appeared. Also, given that Reiji took possession of Yuto's duel disc, Yuto has been unable to contact Shun about his current whereabouts. As much as Yuto shrugged this moment off, there was no way he would the next time. This is where we would get into the Miami Championship Battle Royale, where there are a lot of moving pieces occurring simultaneously. As such, the scope of this rewrite will start to expand to other characters from here on out, with me attempting to follow up on my intended changes as close as possible to the intended chronological order. The first change will be to a duel that occurs midway during the Battle Royale, which is Yuzu vs Dennis. The reason this duel of all that occur is up for the possible changes is part of Yuzu's character trajectory. Going back a bit, Yuzu had been on quite a trajectory, currently on a 3-win streak including a rematch win vs Masumi and a 2v1 clutch with Gongenzaka vs Halil and Olga. However, it's a loss to Dennis that bothers me for both parties. For Yuzu, this loss catapults her into the chase with Yuri, and Yuzu's development is put to shame with how she's presented. On the other side, as we'd come to learn, Dennis is technically not using the full strength of his deck, as he is currently running an Ancient Gear Hound engine as we see in his duel vs Shun. Therefore, he shouldn't win if he's not using the full power of his deck. Initially, I intended to give Yuzu the win, as if there's any duel for Yuzu to actually lose, it's her confrontation with Yuri. However, I must admit that this is unfair on Dennis, given his very next duel is losing to Serena, which is a great debut duel for her, and defeating Yuzu is Dennis's only 1v1 win throughout all of Arc 5. In the end, I decided on a draw with Dennis forcing the draw. I chose this result by looking at it from Serena's perspective. At this point, Serena is naive to the fact that the standard dimension has been introduced to all summoning methods, despite Dennis coming from the fusion dimension, which Serena is unaware of. Therefore, her witnessing an Xyz duelist forcing a draw versus a fusion duelist would provide some interesting and possibly aggressive incentive for her to duel Dennis, possibly viewing him as a coward for not just taking the loss, but also defending the honor of a fusion duelist, Yuzu. Regardless, the necessary events that occur from here on out occur as normal for now. At the same time, just before Yuya encounters Obelisk Force, he encounters Shun, who demands answers regarding Yuto. Yuya admits that Yuto is at his home, and as a form of goodwill, allows Shun to look through his deck to prove he didn't steal any of Yuto's cards. And though Shun respects Yuya's honesty, he doesn't completely trust Yuya, but is willing to apologize for being so suspicious. As soon as Yuya witnesses Obelisk Force card the Night Trio, this is where Yuto's hatred comes flooding in, way more intensely than a Kachidoki duel, as Yuya is witnessing people being carded with his very own eyes instead of recalling a memory. In this moment, Yuya feels the intense emotion from Yuto, who, now standing out of the futon, can see perfectly through Yuya's eyes, also awakened. Yuya completely awakens to the point that Yuto is talking and moving his arms as he is the one dueling, much like how Yuya did through Yugo during the Friendship Cup, although in this case it makes more sense. In this duel, Yuya and Yuto summon Odd Eye's Rebellion Dragon together and decimate Obelisk's force before walking away. It's only until Yuya falls unconscious when being pinned down by Gongensika, Teppei, and Michi while being mind-read by Mieru. After returning to normal, Yuto stumbles and realizes what he saw and felt definitely wasn't a dream, so takes his deck and heads off to the Battle Royale to find Yuya. Soon after this, Yuzu has her encounter with Yuri in the ice field and recognizes him as Yuya, to which he corrects her. Yuzu remembers her earlier discussion with Yuya and Yuto and deduces that Yuri is the fusion doppelganger they suspected is responsible for the kidnapping. Before initiating the duel, Yuzu demands answers from Yuri, who confesses confidently with no remorse whatsoever. Although this duel never had a result, what we saw was truly terrible. Not only didn't we see any actual dueling action, but instead we see Yuzu cowering in tears below a cliffside, hiding in fear of Yuri. This moment is truly disgraceful to Yuzu, who has had amazing development prior to this moment, especially for a Yu-Gi-Oh! Girl character. I can only guess this was done to up Yuri's creep factor, although it was completely unnecessary. Just earlier, Yuri carded Halil and Olga off screen, who, as we saw earlier as well, gave Yuzu and Gongensika a tough match, so this already proves Yuri's dueling skills. Another reason is most likely that the writers didn't want to ruin the surprise of Yuri's East monster, Starbeam Venom Fusion Dragon, whom we wouldn't be properly introduced to until episode 106. This is one of my biggest issues with Yuri in general. Yuri just relies on Starbeam Venom in every duel, which does make sense as it is really overpowered. However, in respect of its eventual formal introduction, I'd have Yuri just duel with his regular Predaplants. Not only would this make him appear more skilled, showing he doesn't even need his extra deck, but it would make Yuzu more scared by Yuri's dueling ability rather than just his personality. As mentioned previously, I'd have Yuri defeat Yuzu on screen, which then leads into the chase, only for Yugo to indirectly rescue Yuzu, leading them to both being teleported to the Synchro Dimension. Getting back to Yuto, we'd see him again when Yuya is about to go berserk after witnessing not only the Lava Bridge duel, but also witnessing Sora card Hikage. Yuto would also feel this, but in a moment of understanding, Yuto will be trying to calm Yuya down telepathically, which he does, and assures Yuya that his prime instinct to get through to Sora will be enough. Yuto would finally reach Yuya during his rematch against Reiji, specifically when Reiji questions Yuya about his pendulum advancements. When Reiji points out that Yuya's pendulum fusion came from his bond with Yuzu and Sora, he asks where Yuya's bond came from to allow him to pendulum exceeds. This would be the perfect moment for Yuto to appear, exhausted from the run, but relieved to see Yuya, and to be reunited with Shun. With Yuto back in the main cast, Shun would vouch for Yuto's skills and request Reiji to allow Yuto to join the Lancers, with Reiji agreeing. Before everyone heads to Reiji's office to go to the Synchro Dimension, Yuto requests to duel Yuya for 2 reasons. This would replace Yuya vs Yoko at Yuto's request, but Yuya still receives Smile Word from Yoko before starting the mission. First reason being that Yuya has less experience dueling for survival, and while being able to create action duels outside of the standard dimension could give the Lancers the advantage, if the enemy learns quickly enough, they could balance the playing field, as we'd witnessed in the Battle Royale vs Security in episode 56, but primarily to see if Yuya can really change people's hearts. Yuto has grown to deep down have a firm belief that it will take much more than beating Duel Academy to end the war, and believes that Yuya's duel-taining could be the key. But as we'll soon learn, Yuya isn't ready in the slightest. In almost every turn, Yuya wastes resources, while Yuto manages to shut them down one by one with just a single card, proving Yuya isn't ready. At one point, they'll both summon their dragons, but because they've already become one, neither one awakens. This duel will end with Yuya almost losing during his own turn, much like against Reiji, but Yuto decides to forfeit because he finally decides to go on without Yuya. Of course, Yuya shows up anyway to Yuto's dismay, but realizes nothing will stop Yuya until he rescues Yuzu. Now with Yuto joining the Lancers, not only would he receive pendulum cards from Reiji, most likely a scale 2 and scale 5, this means he'll have to join one of the groups when the Lancers get separated when they teleport to Synchro. I know some people don't like the separation of the Lancers, but I personally don't mind it, as it allows our group to experience different aspects of the Synchro Dimension. Looking at Yuto specifically, I believe it makes sense for him to stick with Shun, especially when they are encouraged to take part in the underground riding duel arena. The first reason being is that it keeps Yuto out of the main story, as almost immediately, Yuya and Serena are identified as fugitives due to Yuzu and Yugo's actions the previous night, so adding Yuto would lead to more confusion. Yuto would still end up being taken to the facility, but it makes more sense to see his bond with Shun, which we didn't get too much of in Standard. I'm sure we would like to see them working together more to see their friendship, and how it may have changed because of the war and Rui's kidnapping. I'd also change the duel with Dennis and have Yuto duel instead of Shun. Yuto and Shun will eventually duel in the Friendship Cup, and due to some upcoming changes, Shun will duel more than Yuto in that tournament, so I believe Yuto should take this duel, but more importantly, it would show how similar Yuto and Shun are. Shun was able to rightly deduce that something was off about Dennis during their first duel, and I have no doubt that Yuto would be able to as well, and Shun would be more convinced viewing their duel from a distance. Yuto, Shun, Dennis and Gongenzika will still be rounded up and taken to the facility, so they would still meet up with Yuya, Serena and Shingo. Yuto in the facility wouldn't really change the story, but would be an opportunity for Yuya to demonstrate that he can change people's hearts. We see Yuya do this with Chojiro and other inmates, and I have no doubt that Yuto would be inspired and maybe even impressed. Despite this, the escape would occur as normal, with all the Lancers, Chojiro, Crow, Shinji and Damon being brought to Roger in the council and be entered into the Friendship Cup. Tony has been removed as Yuto will now be taking his place in the tournament. Initially, I was unsure who Yuto should duel, and how far he should progress before being eliminated, as all the duels in the Friendship Cup are decently good, even if the tournament itself did slightly derail the overall plot of the Dimensional War. Eventually, I decided on Yuto dueling and losing to Serena in the round of 16. The reason for Yuto not progressing at all is because I believe there's more for him to gain from losing this duel rather than winning. As much as Yuto hopes for Yuya's ability to duel Tane, he's still not completely convinced it is the right way forward until this duel. Much like with Serena in her duel vs Yugo, Yuto would experience the joy of dueling, and in doing so, wouldn't be so disappointed when he loses, but satisfied with his performance. Also, winning would result in Yugo vs Serena not happening, and given Yugo's position, he would have to win the rematch with Yuto for the plot, which I believe is unnecessary. But more importantly, this duel would provide more backstory to Yuto and Ruri's relationship. As we see in Yugo vs Serena, we get more backstory for Yugo and Rin, which made sense as Serena is Rin's doppelganger, and due to his obliviousness, Yugo initially perceived Serena as Rin, and I imagine it will be difficult for Yuto to not do the same. Now, I doubt that Yuto would be completely oblivious to Serena, especially since they are comrades, but I am sure that in moments when Yuto focuses on Serena, he does see Ruri in her. From this, we would get Yuto reminiscing more to his time with Ruri and Shun before the Fusion Dimension invasion. Another aspect of this duel is that it will be similar to Yuzu defeating Yuya in episode 2, which felt like a nod to Rei defeating Zark. Now this concept wouldn't remain true for all U-Boy vs Bracelet Girl matchups, although as we'd witness, Serena purposely disadvantages herself in her duel with Yugo, by refusing to take an action card that she was purposely led to, meaning with it she could have won that duel to continue the trend. As for the rest of the round of 16 duels, they would end the same, with Yuya, Shinji, Crow, Shun, Yuzu, Sergei and Yugo all advancing. With the quarterfinals there are no changes to be made except two, one result change and the order. Starting with the order, originally the duels occur as follows: Yuzu vs Sergei, Yuya vs Shinji, Crow vs Shun, ending with Yugo vs Serena. The new order would be Crow vs Shun, Yugo vs Serena, Yuzu vs Sergei, ending with Yuya vs Shinji. The reason the order matters is because of some changes with the semi-finals that I will get to, but also because of how Obelisk Force invasion occurs in conjunction with Yugo vs Serena and Yuya vs Crow. Serena being defeated puts her permanently on the run from both Obelisk Force and security, while the actual invasion occurs during Yuya vs Crow, prompting Yuya to search for Yuzu and Serena after winning the duel. With this order change, all it would do is cause Serena to be on the run earlier and longer, prompting Reiji to fight back against security in the council house and encourage Reira to rescue Serena sooner, with some assistance from Tsuki Kage. This would result in both Yuya and Yuzu being stressed about Serena's well-being, which would affect them in their duels. However, before then, I want to go over the result change that is quite controversial. I'm going to have Shun defeat Crow. Admittedly, I'm a bit unsure about this change as I do like Crow, however I believe it's this duel where Shun started to fall off as both a character and duelist. From this loss onward, Shun doesn't fully win another duel. Sure, there are several group duels he wins versus the small fry of every villain faction, but they don't count as real opponents. There is his win versus the Tyler sisters, and while Shun contributed to this win is more for Yuya as he completed the winning play. And then there's his win versus possessed Ruri. However, I believe this wrote to be contradicting towards the power of the parasite in Ruri's head, as Ruri was somehow able to temporarily fight back against the parasite, yet Rin was unable to in her duel versus Yugo. Getting back to Shun vs Crow, I believe this would be a good win for Shun, given who Crow is, meaning even without Shun getting a major win from here onwards, he has enforced his power level in our Arc 5 cast. Now with this win, Shinji would be even more fired up when dueling Yuya, as when originally Shinji was defeated first, Crow promised to carry on his feelings and wishes, and I have no doubt that Shinji would do the same for Crow, except just more extreme and detriment to Yuya's intentions, making that duel harder for him. The quarterfinals would still conclude as normal, with Yugo, Sergei and Yuya all advancing. Now moving to the semi-finals, we have two changes that I alluded to earlier, once again, the duels and the order. The reason I had Yuya duel last is because his semi-final will occur second, allowing the first semi-final to be Yugo vs Sergei. This is the duel that was meant to happen, but with Yugo disappearing during the Obelisk Force invasion, he was disqualified, leading to Jack vs Sergei. That is still an amazing duel, and it will still happen, but I do think that Yugo vs Sergei would be interesting as well. and the reason is that it is an opportunity for Yugo to have a more complex character moving forward. An aspect of Yugo that is mostly glossed over after his duel with Duel Chaser 227 is his dislike of the class system of the Synchro Dimension. However, despite Shinji heavily advocating for rebellion against the system, we hardly see Yugo's thoughts or feelings regarding it and what he wishes to do about it if anything, and in none of his duels do we see him reflecting on his society, unlike Yuya, who despite not from Synchro, is heavily conflicted by his position in the class system conflict. Unfortunately, the duels we see him in, versus Shingo and versus Serena, neither opponent is meant to clash with his societal view, but rather his ability to entertain and his ideals about luck and chance. This is why I decided to give him the duel versus Sergei. If there was ever an opponent to make Yugo consider his societal position, it would be Sergei. Now although Sergei doesn't come from Tops, being Roger's personal puppet, he would indirectly represent Tops, especially with how deranged he appears during his duel with Jack when combining himself with his D-Wheel. I'd have Sergei intertwine his societal view with his love for destruction, and how he views the competition between Tops and Commons as something beautiful, or like a bomb waiting to go off, which would get under Yugo's skin. Sergei's comments and having watched through Shinji's speeches would make Yugo consider his capability to make change, mirroring himself with Yuya even more. Yugo would still barely defeat Sergei before Sergei purposely lets himself dangerously crash, causing Yugo to be in shock and confusion as he arrives back at the Duel Palace arena. Roger will still recover Sergei, and because of the damage, Sergei will be quickly patched up and zombified for his remaining 2 duels. As for Yugo, while contemplating his current thoughts, who should be watching him from above but Yuri? At that moment, Yugo drops all his thoughts and races out of the palace in the same pursuit of Yuri. This is what happened at the end of Yugo vs Serena, but I chose to stall it till here so Yugo could still complete his semi-final, but he would miss the final, and this will play a part in the final stretch of this rewrite. Moving to the other semi-final, this has now been changed to Yuya vs Shun. Another reason why I had Shun defeat Crow is because given what happens to Yuya in this duel, I believe Shun is a better fit to deal with it. We've seen in various duels Shun's ability to keep on fighting and taking blows, despite losing his monsters, but then being able to immediately bounce back, and given Yuya's aggressiveness in this duel, that aspect will come in handy. What also makes Shun a better fit is that he has a better connection to Yuya than Crow does, since they are already Lancer teammates. When Yuya awakens during the duel, due to the attempt of the control device in his helmet, it takes a while for Crow to catch on, and for a while, Crow believes Yuya has betrayed him, as their original intention was to escape the dueling lane to assist Reiji and Reira. On the other hand, Shun would more easily catch on to something being off with Yuya, and after the rough patch they got over during the Miami Championship Battle Royale, Shun would attempt to get through to Yuya while remaining on the defensive. Also, this would make the moment with Sora more interesting. Shun and Sora have their rivalry, which would make Sora doubt whether Shun will take his word, but it also makes notifying Shun about Obelisk Force much easier since he's acutely aware of the threat they pose, making Shun more desperate to end the duel to deal with them. Now, as part of Yuya's awakening, all 4 U-boys awaken as well due to the intensity, which I am going to change. Instead, only Yuya and Yuto will awaken, with Yuri and Yugo just feeling an itch in their heads. I feel all 4 awakening, while cool, prevents Yugo and Yuri getting the time to face off and just keeps delaying their duel. It's during this time that the Commons Rebellion would have started, leading to an outbreak from the underground area. However, Crow chooses not to take part and instead joins the defeated Lancers as they head off in pursuit of Yuzu, Serena and Obelisk Force. Yuto would still be awakened and in doing so would aggressively come to duel several Obelisk Force members. Yuto would unfortunately not have access to Dark Rebellion temporarily, but duels just fine with his Phantom Knights. Eventually, Yugo catches up to Yuri and tired of running decides to duel. Now they would be dueling a short distance away from the climactic building that this Obelisk Force invasion culminates in, which will be referred to as the warehouse. This duel won't end in a result, but have Yugo and Yuri go at it with their Speedroids and Predaplans. Reira would eventually seek refuge in the warehouse, while Tsukikage, Sora and Yuto are fending off Obelisk Force, and the rest of the Lancers are attempting to find them. After Yuya defeats Shun, he'd race off to find Yuto, so they can team up to rescue Yuzu and Serena. Yuya would find Yuto passed out from being awakened, and they race off to the warehouse to come to Reira and Serena's defense. Now, all 4 U-boys are in proximity, but Serena's bracelet is unable to teleport Yuya or Yuto away from each other, while Yugo and Yuri are deemed far enough away to not activate the bracelet. It is here that Barrett arrives, only for Sergei to crash through the roof at the same time. This leads to a 4-way battle royale with Yuya and Yuto working together, but Sergei and Barrett are dueling solo. As the duel nears its conclusion, all 4 U-boys would summon their Ace Dragons simultaneously and awaken. This is when Yuzu would arrive, and her and Serena's bracelets would activate, teleporting Yugo and Yuri away, while Yuya and Yuto return to normal. This is because from the bracelet's perspective, it is easier for them to teleport Yugo and Yuri away together, rather than Yuya and Yuto whose souls are tethered together. Before the bracelets can activate again, indirectly working together, Barrett and Sergei would defeat both Yuya and Yuto, leading to Barrett taking Serena and Sergei taking Yuzu. With our group having unfortunately failed, they would come to witness Jack vs Sergei. With the ongoing Commons Rebellion, Roger still sends Sergei out to duel Jack, which still ends with Jack's win and Sergei's eventual death. After this, Yuto would also witness Yuya vs Jack round 2. This would be the best tipping point for Yuto in his belief in Yuya. After having failed to protect both Yuzu and Serena, Yuto would almost regress to how he was when he lost Ruri, but this duel would not only raise his spirit, but reinstill his faith that Yuya can change people's hearts. Yuto would mainly be patrolling in the streets of Commons alongside Gon Genzaka, Shingo and Shun, then make his way with them to sector security to rescue Yuzu. When witnessing Yuya and Yuzu reunite, Yuto would also be brought to tears, not only because he cares about Yuzu, but seeing Yuya reunite with her would give him hope that he can also save Ruri. Of course, we still get the famous wormhole scene, and this was a conflicting scene to sort through. As much as I want our group to stay together as they are, the fact is they do need to be split up across both Fusion and Xyz to advance the plot from both dimensions. After thoroughly sorting through the available characters, I decided with Yuzu and Yuto. The reason for Yuzu, despite her recent reunion, is needed as the way the plot advances in Fusion is via the Yusho Duel School, and we need someone familiar with Yusho to learn his backstory. Now we could have Yuya do this, but given my later intentions with him, he needs to go to Xyz to win the aftermath himself. With that, Yuzu is the only character that makes sense to go to Fusion. However, I chose for Yuto to go with her, as having witnessed the reunion, Yuto would immediately have jumped after Yuzu after she separates from Yuya, but manages to grab onto her, taking them both to Fusion together. This still leaves Yuya, Gon Genzaka, Shingo and Shun to be sent to Xyz as normal. I initially considered sending Yuto to Xyz, but I feel there will be way too many characters being sent to the same place at the same time, and I feel with Yuya, Gon Genzaka and Shingo, you have a good Lancer trio, while Shun is the better candidate for being the resident Xyz Resistance member. In the Fusion dimension, Yuzu and Yuto will be together mainly so that Yuto can reassure Yuzu to reunite her with Yuya, but being in the Fusion dimension will be a detriment to Yuto. Being surrounded by people so comfortable with the war, Yuto would be more willing to awaken, and despite being in separate dimensions, his rage and hatred would reach Yuya. Not so much for him to also awaken, but to be more willing to do so. Yuzu, despite not being Ruri, would be there to calm him down, which would be foreshadowing to Yusho's recognition that the bracelet girls were necessary to calm down their respective U-boys. Yuzu and Yuto would eventually be cornered by Obelisk Force on the bridge, but despite Yuto being ready to duel, Asuka would still intervene and rescue them, and take them to the Yusho Duel School, which would fully reunite Yuzu with Yusho and learn his story since his disappearance. After learning about Yusho's adventure, Yuri would arrive and defeat some of the students like normal. Yuto would be ready to duel him, but Yuzu's bracelet would activate, teleporting Yuto to the Xyz dimension. Just moments later, Yugo would appear, but Yuzu's bracelet would activate again, this time teleporting Yuri away. Yusho would be there to witness all of this, and having noticed how similar all three boys looked, this would feed into his later thought process when witnessing Ryo's duel. Yuto would be teleported back to Xyz in proximity of Yuya, who at this point has just arrived at Yuto's old school. They'd reunite and Yuto would lead Yuya around. The plot in the Fusion dimension for the moment would continue as it normally would. Back in Xyz, Yuto would return to his old locker, to which he would take out the old picture of himself, Ruri and Shun, hoping to return to such a happy time, but deep down knowing that they have all changed too much to go back to how they were. Edo would still appear later and challenge Yuya after bringing up Yusho. The duel would start with just Yuya and Edo, but due to Yuto's hatred for Fusion, Yuya would be slightly awakened but not completely. After Yuya takes the hits from Edo's Destiny heroes, Yuto would take over the duel and use Yuya's deck from Duel Disc, and due to him almost awakening, he'd still be able to use some of his cards. The reason I'd have Yuto take over from here is because he feels he has the better experience, and because he, more so than Yuya, deserves to summon Dark Requiem Xyz Dragon, as this monster is the embodiment of Yuto's hatred and anger. The duel would still conclude in a draw, to Yuto's dismay, with Yuya hiding from more Duel Academy students who arrive to take care of Edo, and only until they leave does he attempt to dig Yuto out of the rubble. Yuto would be frustrated, but Yuya would scold him, as he was hoping that Yuto would try to connect with Edo rather than pummel him. Yuto would reject Yuya, as it isn't the right time to do so, and that while they are in a war zone, they need to survive first. Eventually we get to the Tyler sisters. One minor change is removing the Tyler sisters defeating Shingo and Gon Genzaka. As much as this off-screen duel was meant to display how strong the sisters are, it became apparent that at this point, Shingo and Gon Genzaka had become the punching bags of our main cast, to prop up other characters, like in this case the sisters, Yuya and Shun. Shingo and Gon Genzaka losing to Kaito felt necessary, as that was his debut, but the Tyler sisters had already defeated Aren and Sayaka on screen, which already proves their strength, even if Aren and Sayaka weren't the most challenging opponents. In the end, Shingo and Gon Genzaka don't need this loss, meaning we can move right onto the tag duel of Yuya and Shun vs the Tyler sisters. During the duel, Edo would attempt to fish Yuya out to take him down to disprove his father's ideals, but much like when they first met, Yuto would save Yuya, but in the process would be chained instead. Edo complies to duel him since they ended in a draw. This time, Yuto would get pushed back, but after witnessing Yuya dual-taining against the Tyler sisters, is inspired to dual-tain himself, a bit against Edo. At this point, Yuto, not awakened but rather coordinated with Yuya, uses Odd Eyes alongside his Dark Rebellion as part of his performance, and specifically uses Odd Eyes to win the duel as a homage to Yuya. This surprisingly works, and Yuto, after the duel, apologizes to Yuya for doubting him, but still believes that while changing people's hearts is possible, they do need to survive before they do that. Yuya does agree to this, but they both know he won't stop trying. This will be when our Lancers, along with Edo, will teleport to the fusion dimension. They reunite with Yuzu, which causes Yugo to be teleported again, and Kachidoki makes his return. This time Yuto would duel and defeat him, still trying to dual-tain, although not completely, but enough to make Yuya smile, and for Yuto to have hope for the future. Serena would still appear and kidnap Yuzu, and our Lancers, along with Sora, Crow, Reiji, Reira and Tsukikage, who just arrived, would still make it to Duel Academy. Now I know there are many fans who aren't in any way satisfied with how the fusion arc of Arc 5 was managed, especially the Battle Beast episodes, and I agree. If anything, it just confirmed the main problem with Arc 5, the cast was a bit too big. I'm all for having a wide variety of characters, but they do need to be managed well, and it became apparent that this small arc was used to whittle down the main cast, despite adding more named characters to do so. I personally have no serious issues with the arc after the Battle Beast, so they will remain mostly the same, but in order to get there, these episodes need an overhaul. When the Lancers rush into Duel Academy, they all still fall into the same trap except for Sora, Reiji and Reira, who evade the trap and continue on their way. They would eventually meet up with Yusho, along with Asuka, before being halted by Yuri. Much like in the show, Asuka and Sora would remain to halt Yuri, while Yusho, Reiji and Reira continue to go confront Leo. Getting back to the rest of the Lancers, Yuya, Yuto, Kongenzaka, Shingo, Crow and Tsukikage, they would end up separated in a comparable manner to Team 5D's in the Arc Cradle arc. Our Lancers would be split into pairs across 3 platforms, Yuya and Yuto, Kongenzaka and Tsukikage, and Shingo and Crow. The platforms make it so that they all can't regroup easily, but decide to make their own ways to reunite with Reiji and the others. Yuya and Yuto won't end up meeting back with the others, however our Lancers will be blocked by random Duel Academy students who will be beaten off screen. Kongenzaka, Tsukikage, Crow and Shingo would reunite, and make their way to the Academy courtyard. This is where they run into a familiar face, Ryo Marufuji. In an earlier scene, when Yugo is teleported to Duel Academy, we see on a screen that is describing Ryo Marufuji as a legendary duelist, and this would be the payoff to that little Easter egg. In Arc 5, this alternate version of Ryo only uses his cyber darks, and their constant pain has led him to madness, to the point he's just a ruthless dueling machine with no compassion, no honour. In a way, this would be a better done version of the Battle Beast. Despite this, it's done better, as not only do we get the return of a fan favourite character, but it's not a new character, meaning no time is wasted to establish them, aside from a flashback or two involving Asuka or Edo, and without Yuya, more time is saved on getting through Ryo rather than through to him. This would become a huge battle royale, but the results would end the same. Crow would forcibly eject Shingo to save him, but still get carded alongside Tsukikage, but before Kongenzaka is defeated, this is where Jack makes his epic return and wins the duel. Ryo would just collapse in a comparable manner to Sergei after he lost to Jack. This would leave Jack, Kongenzaka and Shingo the lone survivors, who we wouldn't see again until the Zark Battle Royale. Yuya and Yuto meanwhile have just been running around to try and regroup with the rest of the team, when they spot Shun limping after Ruri. Earlier we saw Yugo and Shun run up the towers to try and rescue Rin and Ruri, who due to the parasites in their brains, they end up dueling. Of course, Yugo loses to Rin, which was a shock to me as Yugo is undefeated at that point, and in doing so she returns to the doctor. This is where Yugo meets with Edo, who attempt to chase after Rin, but find Yuri having just defeated Sora. Yugo will remain to stall Yuri while Edo finds Kaito, who is currently looking for Shun. The reason for this is because I'm changing Shun's duel and have him lose to Ruri. As mentioned previously, it didn't make sense to me that Ruri was able to fight back against the power of the parasite, but Rin was unable to, especially when we learn later that the parasite is still affecting her, which then leads to the duel in episode 124 and 125. After defeating Shun, Ruri would escape on her lireless monster and having Kaito chase after her. Kaito would lose track of Ruri, but as mentioned before, would eventually meet up with Edo. Yuya and Yuto will follow as limping Shun, to which Yuto and Ruri would engage in a duel. During this duel, just like we saw, we'll get more flashbacks to Yuto and Ruri's relationship, and perhaps even have Shun catch on but play it cool. I always got the feeling that despite Shun's rough exterior, he'd be okay with their relationship. Shun would advocate for Yuya to remain with Yuto, only to still get tased by Serena, who joins the duel, followed by Yuya. We'd still get the famous Odd Eyes Raging Dragon scene, along with Ruri and Serena making a getaway, while Yuya and Yuto attempt to help Shun. Ruri and Serena would split, with Yuya chasing Serena and Yuto chasing Ruri. only to end up in the same room, which happened to be the doctor's lab, and then with Yuya and Yuto in opposing cages. All 4 bracelet girls would then be sent to Leo in their tubes, and Yuya would finally see his father, as Yusho, Reiji, and Reira have all found Leo. It's at this point where we knew that the writers were really trying to juggle a lot of plots. As much as they ruined what could have been a better show, I do have to give them credit for what they attempted, not only having so many plots, but managing such a big cast of characters. You have Shun still down in the Parasite Lab, Yugo at Sora's defense against Yuri, Gongensuke, Shingo, and Jack still trying to make their way through Duel Academy, Kaito and Edo on their way to the Doctor's lab, Yuya and Yuto trapped in the Doctor's lab, and Yusho, Reiji, and Reira have finally confronted Leo. I'll start with Yugo vs Yuri. This duel is easily one of the worst handled duels in all of Yu-Gi-Oh! Despite the hype built up for it, we start the duel in episode 126, only to be interrupted by a big exposition dump and another duel, and we don't see any more until episode 130. Personally, I have no real issue with this pacing, but my main issue is with Yugo's treatment, which I'll get to later. For now, Yugo and Yuri will skip their regular Speedroids and Predaplans and go straight into their dragons, Clearwing Synchro Dragon and Starving Venom Fusion Dragon respectively. This makes sense, as we are not only about to learn about Zark, Ray and the original dimension, but it immediately carries on from what we last saw back when they got their duel interrupted in the Synchro dimension. Both duelists will awaken, causing a storm, and due to proximity, Yuya and Yuto will start to awaken as well. As Leo goes on his exposition dump, Yuya and Yuto's decks fall out as their eyes glow, with their ace dragons calling out to Yugo and Yuri's dragons. Both Yuya and Yuto will collect their decks in a whirlwind, at which point Edo and Kaito enter the lab. Due to the whirlwind, Yuya and Yuto will blow their cages, knocking Edo and Kaito back, then Yuya and Yuto would make their way to Yugo and Yuri. However, due to Yuya having finally seen his father again, manages to cling on to his sanity and goes to confront Leo. Yuto follows suit, and both reach the room. On seeing his father again, Yuya manages to return to normal and embraces him. Yuto formally introduces himself to Yusho and recognizes him as Ruri's teacher, whom Yusho recalls. It's at this point Leo reveals his true motives behind his Revival Zero project, to which point he reveals that Yuya, Yuto, Yugo and Yuri are Zark's 4 reincarnations, while Yuzu, Serena, Rin and Ruri are Rei's 4 reincarnations. It's also at this point that we get the duel against Leo. When considering this duel, I was quite conflicted about who should duel him, as almost everyone who could has a reason to. Yusho wants to get through to the friend he once knew, Reiji is adamant on stopping the recombination of the 4 dimensions, while Yuya and Yuto are determined to prove that despite being Zark's reincarnations, they aren't his puppets and can hold him back. In the end, I decided on a 3v1 duel, with Yuya, Yuto and Reiji vs Leo. This might be much, but by scripting the duel better, this could work well for Leo's legitimacy as the initial main antagonist. As we see in the show, Leo proves to be a match for Yuya and Reiji and almost beat them, yet later, despite wanting to defeat Zark the most, gets wrecked by the cards he brought to stop him. By at least giving him a better challenge here, it would prove his skills better, although I doubt it would completely make up for that infamous OTK. At the very least, I would make this duel a better service to Reiji. Despite having been prepared for this fight for 3 years, Leo manages to outclass Reiji by getting past his Dark Contract floodgates and takes advantage of Reiji's one and only move against Leo's Spirit Tech Force Pendulum Governor. If Yuya and Yuto are going to be struggling to holding down Zark, Reiji should be the one to deal the most damage to Leo. Yuya and Yuto will still get their moment to almost defeat Leo with Odd Eye's Raging Dragon, and Yusho will still get his moment where he pins both Yuya and Yuto to the wall with his trap restraining Swords of Impact. Leo will still leave the room to advance the reactor, while Yusho heads off to stop Yugo and Yuri. He'll be met by both Edo and Kaito coming from the lab, to go ahead to attempt to confront Yugo and Yuri. Now originally in episode 130, Edo and Kaito joined the duel to calm both Yugo and Yuri down, but their intrusion is another fault with this duel. In the end, we as the audience just want to see Yugo and Yuri go at it, with no more outside interference. Instead, Edo and Kaito will attempt to enter the duel, but due to the storm created from Yugo and Yuri, they will be blown back and unable to. They will still try to get through to Yugo by mentioning Rin, which will eventually calm Yugo down. On the other hand, Yuri will remain awakened, although not completely aware of it, and while the other characters believe they are facing Yuri, we know that a fully awakened U-Boy is no longer there, but rather all that remains is Zark, and this aspect will play a part in Yuri's slight redemption later. Meanwhile, regarding this duel, I considered giving Yugo the win, so that we could eventually get Yuya vs Yugo, a duel that had been hyped up during the entirety of Opening 3, and would have happened, seeing as how both Yuya and Yugo had made it to the Friendship Cup finals, but it doesn't seem like it would work. The main reason being is that I really love Yuri's upcoming duels, against Yusho, then Yuya, but mainly because Yugo would most likely not be able to summon Starving Venom Fusion Dragon, as it specifically requires dark monsters as material, whereas Yugo only uses wind. I could give myself the excuse that when Yugo absorbs Yuri, his inner Sark grants him a card that makes Starving Venom's summoning requirement easier, much like how Yuri will later have a tuner during his duel vs Yuya. But given that Yugo is no longer awakened, all he wants to do is get revenge, not absorb Yuri. The only reason Yuri will continue going after Yuya and Yuto is because, as mentioned previously, Zark is still pulling his strings without him realizing. Regardless, Yuri will still defeat Yugo and forcibly absorb him, and this is where we showcase the major difference in U-Boy merging. When Yuto was defeated, the reason Yuya didn't absorb him was because Yuya had no intention to. Not that he would have known how to, as he was unaware at the time of his true nature, but because both he and Yuto were in complete sync, and so their souls merged rather than their bodies. In this case, because Zark is attempting to use Yuri as his primary vessel, he would forcibly absorb Yugo into him, and then supposedly both Yuya and Yuto. Even though Zark is the one in control, I'll continue to refer to Yuri. Eventually, Edo and Sora will be trying to get to the main room, while Kaito runs off looking for Shun. As mentioned before, I really enjoyed Yuri's next two duels. His duel with Yusho was really entertaining, and really showed off Yusho's dual-taning skills that have been spoken of greatly throughout the entire show. Easily his best moment was perfectly guessing Yuri's set card to be Super Polymerization, with carefully calculated deduction with all of Yuri's moves and words. I would have preferred if Yusho's card banished Super Polymerization as it returned it to the deck, meaning Yuri did have a slim chance of just drawing it again. In the end, even Yuri is impressed by Yusho's dual-taning, but does end up getting the win more for plot, as Yusho does mostly out-duel him. This would also impress Yuto, who having just heard from Ruri and having spent so much time with Yuya, deep down also wanted to witness Yusho's skills, and completely heartbroken when Yusho is defeated as well. Here is where I've chosen to make a big change, despite the nature of this rewrite. Despite me advocating for keeping Yuto alive to keep him more involved, I am going to have him physically merge with Yuya, but I do have a reason. Firstly, Yuya is the main character, and relative to Yuya, Yuto is a side character, despite being part of the main cast, but it's also mainly because of Yuya's anger. After Yusho is defeated, we see Yuya go completely berserk, especially as Yuri laughs manically at his accomplishment. I would have Yuya so angry that he grabs onto Yuto and forcibly absorbs him into him. Now that both Yuya and Yuto have learnt their truths as Zark's reincarnations, not only does it make sense as to how this is possible, but it mirrors the moment Yuri absorbed Yugo. Yuri forcibly absorbs Yugo in the pursuit of recombining and gaining power, and in this moment, Yuya does the exact same. He gets so angry that Zark is taking control, and so his first instinct is to absorb his weaker half. I'd also have Reiji and Reira in fear of Yuya's actions, and have Yuri proudly smile. As we know, Zark is the one who's controlling Yuri, and this smile is to represent Zark's complete victory, as regardless the victor of the upcoming duel, Zark will reunite and start his new reign of terror. Now, Yuya and Yuri have such a memorable duel. Looking back at this duel, I never fully noticed the symbolism of Yuya's final turn. It was always strange to me that Yuya lost all control as soon as he got to Yuri, as it seemed he was in control during the final turn. But looking at the field, it shows he wasn't. Just as Yuya is about to make his final attack, the only monsters on the field are Yuya's Pendulum Magicians, Stargazer and Timegazer, and all the Dimensional Dragons, Odd Eyes, Dark Rebellion, Clearwing, and Starving Venom. In the end, Yuya, unfortunately, had to not only rid himself of his Performance House to win, but completely focus on just winning, and forgets trying to entertain, discarding basically his complete identity. One thing about the duel I would add is that when Yuya and Yuri steal dragons from either side of the field, they absorb the corresponding counterpart out of the current host into themselves. When Dark Rebellion or Clearwing is stolen, Yuto or Yugo is stolen from either Yuya or Yuri and absorbed into the other. Not only would this give better justification as to how Yuya loses complete control at the end, as at that point he is 75% Zark and not just 50% Zark, but I think it could be an interesting visual. Obviously, this would result in Zark's return, which then leads into the Giant Battle Royale. Contrary to most fans, I really enjoyed the Giant Zark Battle Royale. While it was disappointing to see our protagonists get easily defeated, one pair after another, it was interesting to see the different strategies they attempted against the duelists that have been foreshadowed since episode 126, and to witness how utterly broken Zark was. Although it was frustrating to see some efforts go completely to waste, like Shun and Kaito's attempt for Zark to attack into stronger monsters during his own turn, or Jack being able to overcome Supreme King Dragon Clearwing, there were some standout moments. Seeing Sora and Edo counteract Zark's Pendulum Summon, seeing Crow deal damage after destroying Clearwing, Shingo using his Abyss Crypts, only for Zark to be unfazed and turn their strategies against them. There's the infamous OTK against Leo, which really sums up how underwhelming of an antagonist he was, considering he spent all that time trying to defeat Zark, yet not only was he no match for Odd Eye's Raging Dragon, but he also somehow underestimated that Zark wouldn't be prepared for the 4 nature cards. After all that, Reiji gets the most conflicting turn of the duel. Not only does he seal away Zark's ability to gain life points, but he manages to summon 3 high-class monsters, all with staggering attack, only for Zark to use their effects against him the next turn to completely wipe his field and life points despite his defense. I've said many times in the past that Reiji would have wrecked Zark had he started earlier, yet the writers chose to roll him over to give Rei the spotlight that she didn't really need. This is why I'm making some necessary changes to this battle royale. The first major change is that although Zark recombines within Yuya's body, his form remains blurry/fuzzy up until he summons Supreme King Zark. As he banishes the 4 original dimensional dragons for the summon of his former recombined form, he expels Yuya, Yuto, Yugo, and Yuri, as to him they have served their purpose of bringing him back together, giving him his full demonic design from the original dimension. And yes, this is exactly how all 4 U-Boys will physically survive the ending of Arc 5, rather than just being spirits in one of their bodies. Away from the current battlefield, they all awake and recognize their current position and physicality. It's in this moment that the 4 U-Boys would converse about recent events. I'd have Yuya apologize to Yuto about forcibly absorbing him, and Yugo would apologize for assuming he was Rin's captor. Yuto would forgive them, but then all 3 of them would turn their attention to Yuri. Yugo would be the most annoyed at Yuri for absorbing him, only for Yuri to reveal he has no recollection after he awakened during their duel. This is of course because Zark was in control. Yuya, despite not liking Yuri, tries to comfort him, to which Yuri breaks down. Yuri would explain how all he's ever wanted was to be the best. He never really craved destruction, and only obeyed Leo as he's the only one who gave him any attention. And this is the slight redemption that I alluded to earlier. As psychotic, cunning, and sadistic as Yuri was, there is some truth in the show that Yuri didn't crave destruction like how Zark does. As we see, Yuri's mission was only ever to capture the Bracelet Girls. At no point was Yuri walking around using Chaos Ancient Gate Giant to lay waste to a whole city and dimension. Now despite this, Yuri doesn't have any remorse for the people he's carded, but that all he ever did was in the service of Leo, the only person who really paid him attention. Yuri does acknowledge that the only plausible reason Leo did was because Yuri was his Zark counterpart and nothing more. And in the end, once Leo had everything he wanted from Yuri, he would have no hesitation to kill off Yuri himself. Now from what we've seen of Leo, it's highly unlikely he'd be successful, but the concept of having the intention is all Yuri needs to begin to hate the person he once saw as a father. Yuri pathetically attempts to apologize to Yuya, Yuto, and Yugo, and while Yuto does shake hands, Yugo blows Yuri off completely, Yuya proves to be the more empathetic, as he can relate to how important it is for any child to have that kind of paternal and maternal figure in your life. Moving on from all the U-Boy interaction, their attention swiftly returns to the Zark Battle Royale. The U-Boys all admit they feel guilty about Zark's revival, and that they have a responsibility to try to take him down. This is where Yuya would suggest to retrieving the nature cards from the reactor to stop Zark, but Yuto would discourage the idea as he correctly suggests that Leo would have already retrieved them. This is where Yuri and Yugo are quickly informed of Zark and Rei's backstory that they have learned. From this, Yuri correctly suggests that Zark would be prepared for the nature cards, as such a powerful duelist would be prepared for a strategy that already defeated them. All 4 would agree to still go to the reactor to get Rei's help in a similar manner to how Rei did. As they make their way to the reactor, Zark would indirectly interfere with them when summoning his dragons. Despite not being the original owners of them, each U-Boy does have a strong connection with their corresponding dragon, so when Zark summons the Supreme King Dragon counterpart, the corresponding U-Boy can feel the original in pain, like the pain of Zark's awakening within them. Yuto will be the first, followed by Yugo twice, as Clearwing was used twice, then Yuya, to be followed by all 4 simultaneously. They'd all help each other on their way to the reactor. When they reach the reactor, they all reach inside and concentrate on memories of their corresponding Bracelet Girls to equally share Rei's spirit within them. This act proves easy for Yuya, Yuto, and Yugo, but slightly more difficult for Yuri, considering he hardly had any emotional connection with Serena except their brief time working for Leo. Eventually they all succeed and head to the battlefield and join the duel just as Reiji is defeated. All 4 would stand up to Zark, and despite his taunting and mockery, their confidence visibly outweighs his arrogance. The order would be Yuri, Yugo, and Yuto, with lastly Yuya as he is the main protagonist. Having acquired a part of Rei's spirit, all boys are granted a summoning specific card to retrieve the nature cards from the graveyard. This is a play on Rei's life transformation spell, but a bit more balanced. Each U-Boy would summon an extra deck monster of their type and set their card face down. For Yuri, a Predaplant Fusion monster, for Yugo, a High Speedroid Synchro monster, for Yuto, a Phantom Knight Xyz monster, and Yuya, the only non-extra deck monster, a Performable Pendulum monster. Yuya would get the moment of taking down Zark, but share certain moments or words with the other U-Boys. Each set card allows Yuya to tribute a monster to set its corresponding nature card on the field, then activate it. As each card is activated, the corresponding Bracelet Girl from within the U-Boys explains the effect of each nature card. Yuzu for End Flowers, Ruri for End Birds, Rin for End Winds, and Serena with End Moon. Zark will be down to his last 1000 life points, but Yuya's turn isn't over yet. One final card effect allows him to summon a banished Pendulum monster to his field with its effects negated and destroyed at the end of the battle phase. So what other monster does he summon but his reliable Odd-Eyes Pendulum Dragon? All 8 counterparts would chant the summon and the attack, together defeating Zark. As Zark's defeat is about to divide the dimensions for the second time, the Bracelet Girls all share a nod of resolve, separating from the bodies of the U-Boys, only to high-five each other in a similar manner to Ending 4, and finally rejoin into Rei, which would be our first time actually seeing her in full. Without words, she would hold onto a vibrating Zark and forcibly throw herself with him into the reactor just as it finally goes off. This would permanently kill off both, while the reactor completes its intended goal of recombining the 4 separate dimensions into what would be known as the singular pendulum dimension. This is where we would get a similar setup for the ceremonial duels like in the show. Yuya would be invited to a rebooted version of the Miami Championship, and to start off, a 4-way exhibition match would be held before the main event. Instead of Yuya, Gongensuka, Shingo, and Tsukikage, we would get Yuya vs Yuto vs Yugo vs Yuri. Yuto, Yugo, and Yuri would be represented as coming from other duel schools, with Yuri coming from Duel Academy, Yuto coming from the Spade branch of Heartland Duel School, and I'm unsure about Yugo. I guess he can just duel unaffiliated. The 4 of them would start having fun, using their regular main deck monsters during the match before Reiji calls for a timeout, to reveal he knows the boys are holding back. As their memories return, the U-boys are choosing not to use their ace dragons as they still feel guilty about returning Zark. Eventually they'd continue, and I'd have Yuya win overall. Yugo would defeat Yuri, Yuto would defeat Yugo, with Yuya coming out as the overall winner, defeating Yuto. Despite this rewrite being geared towards Yuto, it makes sense for the actual protagonist to be the winner. Unsatisfied with their dueling, Reiji chooses to issue a challenge to the U-boys. Each one will face their toughest opponent yet, and if any of them should not summon their ace dragon and or lose, they will never be allowed to duel in tournaments or professionally ever again. This would be like Reiji's ceremonial duel in the show, but for all the U-boys. Yuya, Yuto, Yugo, and Yuri would then be transported to the ruined Duel Academy courtyard. Yuri would be the first one to point out the destruction caused and show some slight remorse. This is when they'd all meet Sora, who'd bring them to the outer door of Leo's room, only to witness Shun attempting to break in, while Asuka pleads with him to stop. Shun eventually enters, only to learn of Leo's regrets and apologies, but mainly the possible truth that Ruri may never return, because of Rei's sacrifice at the end of the Zark duel. This is where, much like in the show, Shun attempts to accuse Yuya of his despair, as he feels everything started to go wrong for him when he met him, only for Yuto to come to Yuya's defense, which results in the U-boys' first ceremonial duel of Yuto vs Shun. Yuto would perform a pendulum summon during this duel, but would refuse to summon Dark Rebellion. Yuto attempts to use graveyard effects to make up for it, but they prove ineffective as Shun was already prepared for them. It's also during this duel that Yuto and Shun voice their grief for Ruri, with Yuto outright stating his love for her and his frustration about being unable to protect his best friend's sister, which would be expected of him, and his lack of control over Zark. Otherwise, Rei would never have needed reviving to stop him. After a long moment of silence at the start of the final turn, Yuya calls out to Yuto at how the rest of them, excluding Yuri, feel the same way, and that we can wallow for as long as we want, or we can live in the way the Bracelet Girls would want them to. With this, Yuto overcomes his fear and doubt to not only summon his dragon, but evolve it into Arc Rebellion Exceeds Dragon, which allows him to win the duel. Shun doesn't need to smile here, but he drops his anger against Yuya and shows relief that he still has his best friend, and that they can both honour Ruri's life by moving on like she would want them to. This is where Leo appears and dives further into his thoughts, leading him to the extremes of his Revival Zero project and his slight care and admiration for Serena. It's here that Yuri abruptly cuts Leo off, calling out his so-called love for Serena and that it was clearly fake, given what Leo's intended plans were for her. Leo admits that although he may have felt differently before, he had truly grown attached to Serena, only for Yuri to question if Leo had the same feelings for him. Before Leo can answer, Yuri does so for him, claiming that there was no way he could, as Yuri was a piece of the mortal enemy that his daughter defeated, that Leo had no concerns of raising Yuri as a seemingly perfect vessel for Zark's revival, to only be discarded, or even worse, once he had finished his role of Bracelet Girl Kidnapper. Yuri steps it up more, calling Leo out as pathetic and weak-minded, and that if he really loved Rei, he would have respected her wishes to keep the U-boys, the Bracelet Girls, and the Dimensions separate. At such a line, Leo cannot hold his anger back despite the correctness, and challenges Yuri to a duel to, in his own words, put him in his place. With this duel, Leo is getting a chance of really proving his skill, which shows, as for the first time Yuri is backed into a desperate corner, as even with the duel vs Yuya, Yuri was in a strong position only until the final turn. Just before the final turn, Yuri is ready to concede, as he feels there's no way for him to beat someone who's known him his whole life, therefore completely knowing how to counter him. It's here Yugo calls out Yuri as a coward for not seeing the duel to the end, and cockily recalling how much Yuri ran away from Yugo in the Synchro Dimension. Yugo also angrily calls out how Yuri can have done all the terrible things he's done, like carding several duelists, kidnapping Ruri and Rin, just to give up to the guy who set him on that path. And with that, Yuri is motivated to summon his dragon, and use it in combination with a Predator Plant to summon Starving Venom Predator Power Fusion Dragon, which allows him to win the duel. Leo apologizes to Yuri, and wanting to move on, suggests that Yuri go on his own path and choose his own destiny without any external approval. It's at this point Yugo notices Jack watching above on the Dimensional Turbo Duel track. It's revealed here that it was partly Jack's idea to put the U-Boys to these ceremonial duels. Having heard about Yugo's aspiration about dueling him, and given Yuya got a free pass to duel Jack as Yugo was unfortunately disqualified, Jack challenges Yugo to a duel. This is where Crow brings in Yugo's D-wheel and helmet and the duel begins. During the duel, Yugo is brought swiftly back to how he was before he spotted Yuri after defeating Sergei. By this point, Yugo would have learned how Yuya not only got to duel Jack, but managed to unite the tops and commons with his dueling, causing Yugo to feel inferior. During the duel, Yugo dwells on these complex thoughts, which messes with his concentration and dueling, and initially unwilling to summon Clearwing, his lower level synchro monsters suffer from Jack's aggressive duel style. Getting to the final turn, Jack chooses to give Yugo a pep talk about how he shouldn't dwell on thoughts that serve him no purpose, especially considering that tops and commons are already united now, meaning Yugo shouldn't worry about them and show everyone he's dueling. Not completely motivating Yugo, Yuri chimes in, teasing Yugo about his failure to protect Rin and how if he continues, he'll never be able to protect anyone ever again, never mind a whole city and their class system. Instead of getting aggravated by these words, Yugo finds calm in focusing on what Rin would want him to do. In this calm, Yugo doesn't have a focused mind, he has a clear mind. In this state, he starts to accelerate rapidly, seemingly in his own world, and bring out a high speedroid Synchro Tuner, evolving his Ace Dragon into Crystal Clearwing Synchro Dragon. Yugo snaps right back into the duel and uses his new dragon to win the duel. After taking off his helmet, he shares a nod with Yuya, only for Yuto and Yuri to share a momentary confused look. The reason I have Yuto, Yugo and Yuri use their dragons to summon even more powerful versions shows them not only overcoming the fear they once had, but using their new courage to evolve their dragons to even greater heights in a protagonist-like way, which makes sense since they are counterparts of Yuya. After all that, it comes down to the final duel between Yuya and Reiji. Before the duel, recognizing Reiji's dueling skill, Yuto, Yugo and Yuri all give Yuya their Ace Dragons for the duel. Not only would this allow for Yuya to still have the first turn summoning all 4 dragons and then evolving them, but it shows the other U-Boys' recognition of Yuya and their way of thanking him for helping them move on from their guilt. Yuya would still summon his own hybrid dragons, Venom Dragon, Winged Dragon and Rebellion Dragon, but I would change the final turn from it being an action card race. A big and agreeable criticism of Yuya throughout Arc 5 and towards the latter half is his dependency on action cards. While I don't mind Yuya using action cards to evade Reiji's attacks, I heavily dislike the race towards the end of the duel. Instead, I'd still have Yuya pendulum summon his hybrid dragons and then tribute them to summon his new boss monster, All Eyes Supreme Dimension Dragon. This dragon will be an amalgamation of all the U-Boys' Ace Dragons, and not only is it a reference to All Eyes Phantom Dragon, Odd Eyes Revolution Dragon and Supreme King Dragon Zark, but it will be Yuya's acknowledgement of his original dimension. As we learn, Yuya was Zark's reincarnation for the Standard Dimension, and before Reiji brought the different summoning methods to Standard, the traditional summoning method was regular tribute summoning. Yuya would use this dragon to win the duel, resulting in victory for the U-Boys. As Yuya returns the other boys' dragons, they would all find the nature cards in their decks, and as they hold them out they begin to glow. As they do, just like in the show, the reactor energy scoops up our main cast and brings them into the arena, with the sphere appearing before the U-Boys. Leo would suggest that Rei isn't fully gone, and that there is still some of her left in the cards, and all they need is the rest of the reactor energy. The U-Boys surround the sphere and place their cards in the sphere. The cards glow in their respective bracelet girl colours and take the form of their respective girl. All the U-Boys reach their hands into the sphere and hold onto them and bring them out, causing the sphere to fade away. After it does, Yuzu, Rin, Ruri and Serena open their eyes to see their respective U-Boys in front of them. They greet each other and Yuzu, Ruri and Rin all embrace Yuya, Yuto and Yugo. Since Yuri and Serena never had a close relationship, they just shake hands. This scene would end with the same cliffhanger of Yuya about to duel Yusho. This ending may seem cringe, but I know that we all wanted all the reincarnates to survive the ending of the show, as we were led to believe given ending 6, and this ending does seem meaningful enough. Before I conclude this rewrite, I do have 2 extras, a theory and an epilogue. Starting with the theory, it comes from an idea I had about a conceivable way all the reincarnates could have survived the actual ending of Arc 5. As we see, Yuya and Yuzu are the ones to reincarnate in the Pendulum Dimension. I believe the reason for this is because they were the major counterparts in the original incarnate's bodies towards the end of the Zark duel. What I mean by this is that Yuya was at the forefront of Zark's mind, while Yuzu was at the forefront of Rei's mind. So when Zark's soul was absorbed into Reira, it left Yuya as the major counterpart, and when Rei left Reira's body, Yuzu was the major counterpart to wake up Yuya, which is why they reincarnated in the new dimension. I also assumed Rei left some of her soul in Reira to prevent her from fully succumbing to Zark's darkness. We all see that Yuya has all the Ace Dragons in his deck, so it's plausible that Yuzu would have the nature cards in her deck. By using some fancy machine that I'm sure Leo could create, by using the power of these cards, you could extract Zark's soul from Reira's body. This would return Reira to how she was towards the end of the duel. Then by using Rei's energy from the nature cards, you could theoretically split Yuya and Yuzu into their own counterparts. Then by using Zark's energy from the dragon cards to make each reincarnate their own unique being. You can now either seal Zark's soul away into a card or attempt to kill him off forever. Regardless, all the counterparts survive the ending. As for the epilogue, this would come after the supposed Yuya vs Yusho duel teased at the very end of the show. After that, Yuya would bring Yuto, Yugo and Yuri to Yusho, and here we would get 3 more duels between the U-boys. The main reason for this is because there was a few U-boy matches that we never get to see on screen, and I'm sure even the audience would want to see them as well. The first duel and the most obvious would be Yuya vs Yugo. This duel is the most obvious as it was teased during opening 3, and it seemed like this would be the duel that we would get to end the Friendship Cup, where the victor would get to face off against Jack. Now while I'm confident Yugo could defeat Jack, and Yuya did defeat Jack, I'm unsure who is the better duelist between the two. Yuya seems to have a wider variety of effects in his deck, while Yugo seems to strike hard and fast. Despite this, I'd feel Yuya would win, mainly due to the fact that one of Yugo's traits is to let his emotions determine his duel, and he does have a few luck-based cards in his deck, so he is more likely to make mistakes, which would lead to Yuya's victory. The next duel would be Yuto vs Yuri. This, much like Yuya vs Yugo, would also be an interesting duel, but because of how similar Yuto and Yuri's decks are. Both do have quite a few graveyard effects at their disposal, so ultimately, it would be who has the better graveyard strategy. Due to this, I believe Yuto would win. Firstly, I would give him the win based purely on the fact that this rewrite is based on him, but secondly, I believe his graveyard effects would give him the edge. Yuri's graveyard effects never seem completely planned, but rather a last resort, whereas for Yuto, his graveyard effects are part of his entire deck, and this is what would ultimately give him the edge over Yuri. I also believe Yuto would have a counter strategy for Starbin Venom, which Yuri extensively uses, so Yuto would make sure he is prepared for that. As for Yuya and Yuto, I can't really decide who I'd have win, either personally or in the show, given the more time they spent with each other in person. I feel Yuya's niche effects and Yuto's graveyard effects would cancel each other out in terms of skill, so in that case it comes down to power. Yuya does have some powerful monsters in his main deck, while Yuto usually relies on his extra deck more, but he can easily counter with his spells and traps. I think I'll leave this match to the imagination of the audience. After this, the U-boys would meet up with the Bracelet Girls at the fountain, and we'd get the photo shot from the end of Ending 6 to finish off this epilogue. Looking back at this rewrite, I never expected to write so much surrounding one underutilized character, but as we can see, there weren't many major changes required to fit Yuto into the rest of the story. Of course, towards the end of Arc 5, the rewrite gears towards the rest of the U-boys, but that was an eventuality, as the ending is a big miss in a lot of ways. In the end, having Yuto stick around longer would have given him a proper duo protagonist role with Yuya, and we would have seen more of his development down the line. I do believe this rewrite does justice for his wasted potential. I hope you enjoyed it, and have a good day.